and we're glad you're out there and hope you are keeping warm. I don't know if there's a place in the country that's warm. I was my home state, Alabama. Boy, they got the chills down there, and of course, we're in Michigan here, and the winter wonderland, and we got we got a lot of that in Flint. That's for sure. I was out there shoveling that snow last night. I do it. I do my shoveling in shifts, and I went out there a couple of hours and has a long driveway. If I ever buy another house, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure it doesn't have a long driveway. I have one that's quite lengthy, and you're doing a lot of shoveling out there, and it's two car driveway, and so I feel your pain. Those of you who are in these cold areas, and that's everywhere today. I don't know if there's a warm. I'm trying to think where is that? They were talking about the storm, and it didn't seem like it wanted to go anywhere. It kept a little bit of snow, a little bit of snow, and then boom, this big avalanche that we had, and then we're digging out of that now, and it's just cold everywhere. I keep asking myself, why did I come here? Give me my reasons again for coming here all those years ago. What was I coming here for again? Because I'm from the South, and we used to go out there in the wintertime, Christmas, you go out there in short sleeve shirt, and it wouldn't be unusual to go out there in the month of January in a short sleeve shirt because it would be warm enough in Alabama. But boy, in fact, when I first came here to Michigan, I can recall that first winter I was here, they had that snow in February. It was about 24 inches of snow, and I was up here looking at all that snow falling and having to dig out that snow trying to go to school. I'm saying to myself, I can't be doing this every year. So I thought I was going to be out of here after 1 year. And then I made this idea that maybe I want to stay around until my first class I ever taught would graduate. And then I would, after they go from junior high to the high school and graduate, then I would leave. And now this is what, some 40 years later, I'm still here. But anyway, stay warm wherever you are. And don't let the frostbite get you because it's really, really cold out there. It's not snowing anymore here, but it's one of those biting kind of cold days that we've been having. And I was thinking about, we're talking this program today from Davos, Switzerland, to Minnesota. And I was thinking when I was coming over here that they had Al Gore. Al Gore has made his mark over there in that place in this remote tourist. It's got to be a ski resort because I don't know how you get around in it's really in the Swiss Alps. And I don't know how you get around. You certainly not. I don't. I guess you have to drive. You have to land the. I mean, when the president went there, I don't know if you know, he had to. They had some problems with that airplane, and he had to turn around and go back, and they had to fix some things before he could make the flight. He was a little bit late coming to the meeting, but I wonder how when they get there, are they doing a runway kind of thing? Because I don't know where you could actually. I guess you have the ability to do it, but you're talking about a region that just has nothing but snow and ice. And so they had the meeting over there. Then, of course, I always think about, as it was last week, they had Al Gore. And can somebody please tell me why you have Al Gore coming back and talking about the climate after what he said over the last, how many years has it been? And this man been talking about the climate and things. Supposedly, he's been making all these dire predictions of what's going to happen, and this is going to be underwater, and this ice melt is going to occur, and the polar caps are going to dissolve. All these predictions this man has made, not one of them has come true, and they got this man still speaking over there. So maybe the topic is a salient topic from that area to this problem that we have here in this country, because Minnesota is going off of the rails everywhere. And I had to pick back up. I thought I was going to be able to leave the topic of what's happening in Minnesota, but what is happening is that there's so much taking place that if we don't get this thing resolved in that state, if they allow this governor, by the way, this governor, Tim Walz, was the person that was picked by the deep state to run as Kamala Harris's vice presidential running mate in 2024. And I just can't imagine what kind of disaster that would have been if you had that ticket. I do you give America credit. They rejected that ticket. I guess that was just too much to stomach. One was a hyena, constantly laughing, didn't have anything to say, and was hiding the lack of any substance behind finding everything. Not that she was actually laughing; it was like a just a nervous reaction. But just amazing that that ticket could be as bad as the Democratic Party is. That ticket could not have. I can't see the American people have stumbled even in the dark to vote that ticket in. And really, you know, I guess I'm a conspiratorialist in this sense. I don't think that I really think what we have to do right now is we have got to figure out who were those persons in the background that ordered the election to go the way it went in 2020. Because I'm sorry, I listened to Jack Smith and his testimony, and I am, after listening, I was already convinced, but I was absolutely convinced after listening to this man that these were attack dogs and they were determined to get Trump out of there because they had an agenda lined up, and they couldn't carry the agenda out with Donald Trump being there in the cut, so to speak, and they had to get him out of the way to bring that agenda forward. They never thought that he would be able to reconstitute his campaign and come forward 4 years later. I mean, that only happened one time in our history, and here this man was doing the same thing, being elected in 2016, and not elected. They said not elected in 2020, but I looked at the polls and the numbers and the anomaly of what happened in 2020, and I do not accept that it was possible for the incumbent to get 16 million, to get 12 million more votes, is what it amounted to. He got 12 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, and he won in 2016 with 12 million fewer votes, but lost with 12 million more votes 4 years later. And I contended, and I still contend that I don't think that there's any data that would disprove that the election in 2016, in which Trump did not get the majority of the popular vote, but he got, what was it, 308? It's either 308 or 312 electoral votes. You need 270 to become president. So he did. It was stunning for him to come through and do what he did as far as win the election by electoral vote, because electoral vote elects the president of the United States, and that's because the president of the United States is elected by the states. The states elect the president of the United States. Has anybody ever said that? The states elect the president of the United States in this country. And I don't know if that's well known, But that is what, when they talk about getting rid of the electoral college, that's what they're talking about. Quite frankly, they're talking about it would be unconstitutional to do that because my contention, and you scholars may argue with this and like to know what you have to say about it, but there are certain things you cannot rescind. And electoral college is one of the things in the Constitution that cannot be rescinded because that's the basis upon which the Constitution was then ratified in 1788. I don't think you can go back and rescind that verdict because the ratification of the Constitution was based upon those parameters that were put in place in the way that things were ordered to exist at that point. And so the foundational aspects of the system, you, I don't, you cannot see. I'm arguing a little bit differently than most of the scholars are. I don't think you can actually rescind the basis of what was the foundation upon which the Constitution was ratified, because it was in those tenets that they took to the states. That's what they did after they met in Philadelphia, and they all had to disperse. They always dispersed after the 17th of September of that year, and they went back to their respective states to sell what they had done in Philadelphia to their respective states. And they had to go back there and convince the states to ratify, to endorse what it was they had done. And they endorsed what they did based upon their going back and saying, these are the things that we set up in Philadelphia. Now, I don't know if the scholars would argue this point or not. I don't hear them talking about it when they get these TV scholars on the air, and they're up there. I call them television scholars because that's how I look at them. But I don't know where they stand on the issue of, can you rescind the foundational principles upon which the country was in fact standing on, these tenets that were in fact ratified. First of all, they drafted it in 1787, but ratified it the following year. I don't know if you can amend the document in certain ways that will in fact alter the original intent. Can you actually amend? I'm asking you scholars this question here. I don't think it's been asked by anybody before, but can you actually amend the original intent? And there are a lot of things that's not raised in the scholarly community by these constitutional scholars. But I would like to hear what they have to say about, can you ratify an amendment? You can amend the Constitution, but can the amendments actually be ratified that would alter the foundation upon which the document itself was first ratified and sanctioned by the states in 1788, the original intent ratified at that point? And can you come behind that and rescind the original intent upon which that document was ratified the year after the convention had been held, and therefore you're now rescinding that through the amendment process? Can you do that? And I'm raising the question. Nobody else has raised it, but I raised that question. I raised that question in grad school, and I didn't get a satisfactory answer. And I've been raising it really ever since I have come to the studio, and I raise it today. But I just don't know how you can add some things to the document and claim that the ratification is sufficient, even if by the ratification of that part of the document that you're adding to it rescinds the document or alters it in terms of the foundation upon which the document was in fact originally ratified. Can you actually do that? And I'd like to hear what you scholars say about that, because you don't raise that question, but I'm raising it. But while you're looking at what happened in Switzerland, I want to bring you back into this country, because we have to. There's a lot of things that's happening here that we better start getting our eyes open, wide open here about what's happening in our own backyard before you can go gallivanting all over the world trying to fix this problem and that problem. As long as your own backyard is not fixed, and you're fixing some other problem, I don't know how you're fixing other problem, but you claim that you're able to do that from going to a remote area in Switzerland, and then you can, from that remote area, transform the problems of the world from a remote area of the world, a small tourist village, away from everything. I guess because it is neutral in the sense that by it being there, you can't say it's not. You can't say it's Germany. It's not England. You see, those that would raise some objections. So I think they wanted to try to neuter the opposition to it, because if it is in a place where it's not known for a political arena, it certainly can't be London, and it can't be Washington, can't be it can't it really can't. Where could it be? Where would you have it? And I don't know. I don't know if you could. I know why it's there, but I don't think we should get off the our focal point should not be altered to look away from what's happening right here, right now, because a lot of what's happening in this country right now, if we get diverted and do not fix this problem, I'm talking about this problem that we're talking about in Minnesota right now, but it's really not just Minnesota, but Minnesota is like the apex of this problem, and that is the federal government and the Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States. Is that the is that voice going to be allowed to stand as was intended by the framers, who understood there'd be conflicts between the states and the federal government, and they understood the subordinate role the federal government has in certain respects. When it comes to the federal government, the states have to subordinate their voice, but they can speak with more authority with a unitarian type of stand that they take, but it takes a supermajority to do it. But I understand why what they were doing there. They certainly did not want the states to take lightly what the federal government would say, even though it was a creation by the states. They didn't want to have that subordinate status that is, say, they were created by the states and there's a federal government that's over the states. They didn't want that to be such a subordinate, have a status that was subordinate. So what they did, they didn't want it also bowing and submitting and buck dancing to the states either, and that's why they kind of allowed a way to go around the fact they were created by the states and therefore subordinate to it. But by putting the process in place, and I see it both in the amendment of the Constitution, how you do it, because you can go around the you can go around the federal government in the amendment process, and I understand what they're trying to do there, but I'm raising a question here for I don't think it's been raised in I never seen it raised in public. But can you? I'm raising it here. Can you really rescind through the amendment process? Can you rescind the foundation upon which the original Constitution was ratified? Those 7 articles in the Constitution. Could that now be altered through the amendment process? And I'm saying it cannot. And I want to know what the scholars will say, these other scholars will say about it, because I don't think you can rescind that part of it, because that part of it deals with the original intent in which the document was in fact prescribed, as they threw out the old document and brought in this other document. Can you then rescind that? Because if that were the understanding, they could be rescinded. I don't know if they're going to be willing to ratify a document if at a certain point it could be neutered to the point where that document no longer exists. That's what I'm trying to say here. And I don't think we can do that. But I like to hear some arguments from the other so-called scholars on the Constitution. I don't know. I don't really know who they would be, quite frankly. I don't see them on television. But let's say there are those persons that would have had to come out prior to this more recent time period, because the scholars that are turning out right now, whether they call themselves affirmative action scholars or not, that's pretty much what they are. Cass Nelson's book is a good example of that, where an affirmative action was white. Is the name of his book, and I've talked to him. I talked to him in Lansing at a conference, and it was very interesting conversation. I didn't agree with a lot of things he was saying, but I have to respect the scholarship. But I wish I could have asked. I should have asked him about what his view was on the original intent. Can you rescind that? Can that be amended? How many persons would say what I said 3 or 4 weeks ago here at the studio, and that is that you can add amendments to the Constitution, but those amendments can be unconstitutional if you do not have them in agreement, congruent with the original intent. And if it's not congruent, then they are in fact unconstitutional, even though they added to the document. And we better start paying attention to this, because we are getting very much confused about, does the dog wag his tail, or does the tail wag the dog? And what I mean by that is that, does the Constitution drive what we do in this country, and that's the foundation upon which we make our decisions? And either that is the case, or is it this other thing that we in fact can make it up as we go along? I wonder what you scholars will say about this. In Article 3 of the Constitution of the United States, there are 4 instances in the 3rd article of the Constitution where the Supreme Court is mentioned 4 times. Has anybody ever paid attention to this? Has anybody ever said this on the air? Has anybody ever pointed out anywhere that you know of, in any classroom you've been in, that the word Supreme Court in the Constitution is not capitalized? In 4 different, counting my mind right now, 4 different instances in the Constitution where the word Supreme Court is mentioned, but not one time in that 3rd article of the Constitution, that part of it that sets up the judicial branch of government, Articles 1, 2, and 3, the 3rd article setting up the judicial branch of government. supposedly, and according to the Federalist Papers, was considered the weakest of the three branches of the federal government, co-equal, but the weakest one with the weakest role would have been the judicial branch. And you can see it if you read the document carefully. You'll see, yes, that it was considered the weakest branch because when it says Supreme Court, it wasn't talking about Supreme Court in terms of having being the arbiter of all of the parameters around which the government would in fact operate. That the voice of the Supreme Court would be supreme over the voice of the President of the United States. That's ridiculous. And supreme over the voice of the legislative branch. That's really ridiculous. But that's the way it's interpreted right now because we left the Constitution a long time ago. And while we over in these places over there at these conferences and things like that, do not take your eyes off of the prize here and lose sight of what we have to be doing in this country to maintain what's put in place by the framers. Because I can tell you right now, and I keep saying this over and over again, we're not going anywhere without going back there and bringing back into public discourse, public view, what they were doing in that room in Philadelphia, that same room in which they were in that same room 11 years earlier than that, and they're having endorsed the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. This is in the same room they did both of those documents. And don't be flying all over the place, all over the world, fixing everybody's problems in the world. And we're not getting it. If we ever get this part straight here, we can speak a lot more authoritatively to the world because we fix that. Because we got our own house in order. But until you get your own house in order, you don't have a right to go and order somebody else's furniture around because you've not ordered your own furniture in the right place. And I was noticing the reception that President Trump got, and he got a very icy reception over there. There were a lot of persons that were telling him in so many words they were not buying what it was that he was doing. And of course, what he is saying he's doing is not what he's doing. He's saying that he wants Greenland because Greenland would be part of the national security of the United States because we need to have that as a protective thing in case this country comes under attack. And we need Greenland because of that. And that is not really what that's not really what this is about. And I don't think anybody has said this, although I do know that scholars like Jeffrey Sachs and John Mearsheimer at the University of Chicago, I know they take exception to this unbelievable use of the tariff to bully I think it was Macron that said that Trump was a bully. So they're bullying these. They want to until the 10 of those European states will agree with the United States about Greenland. They want to put as much as 100% tariff on to force him into compliance with what the United States wants to do. And they're telling him, and I was glad to see it, quite frankly, because somebody's got to say something. We have got to say some things when things are going awry and not intended from the scriptures of the documents that we are in fact saying this country is founded upon. We cannot just simply lose our principle because we have a certain interest at a certain point in time. There are grounding points we got to maintain. And if you lose that floor that you're standing on and it's constantly shifting, you won't know where you are. And this president is doing some things, and we're doing some things. The country's doing some things that we've got to get back to square one. And square one is the framers of the country. They did not stand in that room from the 25th of May until the 17th of September. They weren't doing that for in that room to have their work rescinded by their lessers, because we've never seen that room, anybody in that room before, the best and the brightest, and we cannot rescind that which the best and brightest this country had to offer at that time. And there's been no best and brightest since that time that has suborned over what they were, who they were in that room. No, I agree with you, Ayn Rand. I think you're right. The first intellectuals this country had, and so far the last intellectuals this country's had. You can't just go in there and go back there and start cutting this out and cutting that out without understanding the implications of that. You can't rescind the document because the country was founded upon the ratification of that document. That's the foundation of which the country was in fact founded after they decided to discard the faulty document that they had tried to use from 1781 and tried that document, which had been ratified by the Continental Congress, and they thought that they would try to use that document, and then found out that document was too prohibitive. They were too, my view, they were too paranoid. They had come out of an environment where they were not going to allow to go back under the tyranny that they had fought against from 1776 to 1783. And they were not going to go back into the tyranny they fought against and had lives lost, bloodshed, sacrifices made, families disturbed, and so on. The country in bankruptcy at that point, and they were not going to go back to that because they had fought to get out of it at high cost, and they were not going to submit. And so they were very much paranoid about power. I understand why they were there trying to make sure they dispersed it, to make sure that it did not congeal to the point where there was a single point from which power would derive and be singular in that one spot and be concentrated, so there'll be no check upon its authority to act in any manner in which it chose to act. I understand what they were doing. They wanted to disperse power so it would not be able to do that. And I can tell you what they would say right now about what's happening in Minnesota, because this is not it. The framers would not endorse what's happening in Minnesota right now. Where the states are telling the federal government to get out. You couldn't have 2/3 of the states to come together and do that, because the document in Article 6 contains a supremacy clause, and in the supremacy clause, it gives the supremacy to the federal government, even though it's the creation of the states. The supremacy in terms of the voice, the unanimity of that voice, which speaks as an umbrella under which the states operate. Of course, you don't want a dictatorship. You don't want a dictatorship of the federal government. And there are certain things that um, behoove that not to be possible, because there are certain things that are put in place where that becomes prohibitive. If they keep talking about Donald Trump is a king, and he's this person and that person, they describing me, and I don't see the person that they're describing. They were saying that over in Europe, no king, and so on and so forth. They picked up on what they're saying here in the United States. But if that were the case, and that's what this man is doing, he's being a king. He should have. Then when they took that election from him in 2020, and I'm convinced they did it, they took it from him. Trump would not have left office, particularly when he was convinced that he did not lose that election. And Jack Smith, let me tell you something. I watch you very carefully in your testimony. I watch your testimony there, and you stated that what Trump did is that he was told by some members of his team that he had actually lost the election in 2020, and then Donald Trump fired them and brought in other person that would be in agreement with him. And Greg Kelly, you caught that. You did a good job of catching that, because that goes right by. That went right by a lot of people, but you caught it. That Donald Trump got rid of the person that said he had lost the election, got rid of them, and brought in other person that agreed with his idea of what had occurred, and brought in other persons who said otherwise. And Jack Smith had to say that, and I think it was a slip on his part. He said, brought in other persons who would believe as he believed. But the president believed that he had not lost the election. He had every right to raise the question, as he did in the forum that he raised it in terms of raising it before the Congress, to raise that question as he did on January the 6th. Where is he going to raise the question? To challenge the integrity of the vote, if you don't think the vote is legitimate and you have reasons to object to it, because there's an objection in both the House and the Senate. And that objection is what you need right now to bring the question before the entire body, and then have them to take into consideration the objection. And if the objection is sustained, then you have to go back and revisit the submission of those votes. That's what should have happened. And we had a precedent of that in 1876, 1877. And that beclouds everything that Jack Smith did. In fact, they were raising a question. I was very interested in this question they were raising, because I wasn't just totally focused on what they were doing in Davos, Switzerland. I'm always focused on my own country. What's happening here? Yeah, we have to be conscious of what's happening in the world. We live in the world, and the world is much bigger than one country and one people in the country. But you never take your eyes off of what is happening in your own country, because if you do not maintain your country being fixed, you're not standing on firm enough ground to talk about fixing anything else anywhere where else you go, because if you don't have it fixed where you are, You really can't speak to the problems anywhere else. Who's going to listen to you? And your own house is not in order. That idea that you see the speck in somebody else's eyes and don't see the mote in your own eye, you're pointing out problems around the world, and then you have this big problem in your own backyard, and you're not able to see it or to address it. From what authority are you speaking if you're not speaking from the authority of having already done that work in your own place where you have your residence? You have to say that because we've done this, this, and this, we know it works, and therefore we can apply a standard, offer a standard, because we see it as a workable standard based on what's happening in our own country. We're not. That is not what is going on here. A lot of things that we're doing right now in terms of trying to speak on the world stage, the world is not listening anymore. They see too much unglued here in this country. That's what Donald Trump. That's why there was such a icy reception when Donald Trump got to Europe, and they were telling him this in a voice that I'm sure he went there. He didn't go there to hear this voice, to which Europe was speaking from its own claims of sovereignty and saying that this is a matter of our sovereignty. And they were not going to allow him to say that because he makes the argument that the national security of the United States requires him to stand for the taking of Greenland, which belongs to Denmark. But get this noise that you gave it back in at the end of World War II, because Hitler had done what he did in the Sudetenland and so on and so forth in 1936. Yeah, you could argue that history, but you start doing that, you got to start really drawing maps everywhere, because people have claims based upon certain particulars in their own history. And if you start going down that road, we could begin to redraw lines today because we disagree with the lines in the modern time, but they agreed upon that time, those lines in the time period in which you were drawn. If you start doing that, you're creating chaos. And they were speaking boldly to the President of the United States, more boldly than he went there to listen to. And this idea you're gonna put tariffs on countries up to 10 countries, tariffs up to 100% if you have to get your way. They're telling him you're a bully, and they could not allow that to stand because they're now talking about sovereignty. You cannot rescind. This is the problem they're going to have in trying to fix this problem in Ukraine. Because Ukraine, Zelensky, and all the others, they didn't get involved in this 4-year war, and that war need not have even started. But they thought they were going to fight this proxy war, and they're going to make Russia submit, and that is not what happened. That war is now going on 4 years, and now that Zelensky, that war is being lost, is what it amounts to. The West is losing that war, and they're now trying to find some way out of it and save face, because the manpower differential between Russia and Zelensky's the differential is such that they won't have anybody on the ballot. If this war continues, they won't have anybody on the battlefield, because replacement is not going to be there, and they're not going to be able to go and join it directly, because if they get involved in their war directly, then we really are talking about something going on here now beyond the pale, because you don't want this war expanded so that that which has not been used since August the 9th of 1945 will now be back on the table. You don't want that, because you don't want to have this war where you have nuclear powers directly confronting each other. Right now, they are on the sideline and they're pushing. They're the ones pushing. You can solve this. You can solve this war overnight. This war is not hard to resolve. Not hard to resolve. But they want to resolve it upon terms in which they can save face. Because if they solve this war based on the terms that it never started in the first place 4 years ago, then people are going to ask, well, what are they fighting for? All these people dying, and why were they there? And who's at fault? And not going to be Putin's to be blamed for it. It's going to be NATO. That's what they got to deal with. You moving further and further east and encroaching into the territorial domain of other powers that are adversarial to NATO, and you're going to continue to move over there. That creates a problem. That's why the fighting is going on. You can solve this problem tomorrow morning. All you got to say tomorrow morning is we have no territorial intent of going further or even staying where we are in the eastern part of Europe, which is NATO's domain, is in Western Europe, North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. That's what they set up, and that's what they set up in 1949. Where are they now? Are they in the North Atlantic? Is that NATO over there? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization over in Eastern Europe? That's the catch-22 that they're dealing with right now. And they're trying to act like this is so hard to resolve. But I have my eyes on my country, but it does not mean that I'm not conversant on what they're doing in other parts of the world. And when my country, my father used to tell me all the time, my country right or wrong. And he would say it to me a lot of times. We would talk, my country right or wrong. Well, I understand that. I didn't argue with him about that. Yeah, it's my country right or wrong. But I am not going to be silent when I think my country is wrong. And my country is wrong in this case here. And that's why Trump got an earful over there. We don't need Greenland as our nest security. Not in that sense. And I'm the only one saying this, but I do understand what they're doing there. But that has nothing to do with a military insecurity, national security of the United States. And we're talking about national security militarily, because there's no military on the globe that can withstand what this military can do. And we can't withstand the things that other militaries can do, because they all have the ability to bring about extermination. That's what nuclear weapons do. They create shared mutual destruction. And that's why these weapons, as dangerous as they are, who dares use those weapons? Can I ask that question? Who dares use those weapons under the conditions that the people who are in power, politicians, cannot escape the consequences of those weapons being used? And that's really why there's not been a jump off point since August the 9th of 1945, because if those weapons could be made use of, and it does not uh, come back to haunt the ones making the decisions about these wars that you have all over the place, and they can't escape the consequences of it. If they can't, that's why nobody has used those wars. Nobody has used those weapons since the nuclear weapons were proliferated. We haven't had this country has not. It talks about it does not want to have nuclear weapons used. The only country that use nuclear weapons is the United States, and it was only able to use it when they had monopoly on the weapons. Once the weapons were proliferated, which is what the Rosenbergs and all of that was about. You know, we're trying to make sure that you don't have a monopoly on it, because if you had a monopoly, then the use is guaranteed. You got an advantage, you're not going to use it. Where has that happened in history? You gain a military advantage, and you're not going to use your advantage against your foes. Show me where you have that anywhere in the historical record. When they were fighting with tin, and somebody went from tin to iron, and then you see them in these chimney-like steel. You know, went from the Iron Age to steel, and they're fighting out. You fall down, you can't even get up. And I'm just saying, when they went from one level of warfare to another and had an advantage, when did they ever refuse to use it? From tin to bronze, from bronze to iron, and then using other things, and then the Air Force and all of that. When have you seen them say we're not going to be able to use this right here because it would disadvantage the person that we're fighting against? You've never seen that. But the reason why there's the deterrent is because the decision makers cannot escape the consequences of it, because that reaches everybody. There is no hollow ground anywhere. And you have to worry about whether or not, because I do not think politicians are sane. Looking at their history, I don't think you've had that. And we have in Davos, you got people meeting there. Every year they meet, and have yet to solve a single problem. All these years later, you can bring Al Gore in there, and Al Gore's mentioning again some other things with the climate. Even though this man had been proven wrong in everything he's already predicted and put on the record, they're now bringing him in there to speak again. And everybody was tuning him out, by the way, because Al Gore is up there talking nonsense. But that's what we do. There's no problem been resolved there. America, if you want to resolve the problems of Gaza, be the clean hands country, and take that to show them how it operates. Don't be over there telling Iran how they are to, in fact, get their house in order because they have the uprising in their country, because the people there are objecting to the authoritarian leadership of their country. But you want to speak into that environment about the authoritarian leadership in Iran, but look at what they're saying in Minnesota and how they are objecting to the what is really a legitimate voice by our statutes, because the voice of the federal government is not illegitimate in terms of going there and saying that the people that are in that state that have in fact done the things that they're doing, these people over here stealing taxpayers' money, $7 billion. One estimate, the lowest estimate I've seen is $7 billion of taxpayers' money having been siphoned off by these scams they have in that state, and that's only one state. And you can imagine what it'd be like in California, in Oregon, in Washington State, all up and down the Western Seaboard. And look at those states that are out there with these governments, local governments out of control, and look at how they have this infusion of these immigrants that shouldn't be in this country, and how they are protecting them. You know, they're protecting them because that's the base of which their power operates in this country against the statutes and the strictures and the restraints put in place by the framers of the United States. We have brought the immigrants and been brought in here, quite frankly, as a challenge to what the framers put in place. That's why they're here. To challenge that which is stated by the framers of the country. They are challenging that right now. In fact, I heard Ilhan Omar. I don't know if you heard her say this. She was trying to make the country feel bad about enforcing its laws. Excuse me. The country is enforcing its laws, and she was saying that she would never have thought this would happen in the United States. And she used the word, profane word, and saying the United States used a profane word in front of that. I won't mention that here. But in terms of announcing the country, this woman used a profane word in front of the country. She's so disdainful of the country that she used the word in its description, not just the United States, but the word she used in front of that. And I'm going to see what they're going to be doing here, quite frankly. I'm watching this very carefully because it's time. See, we can talk until we're blue in the face, but we've got to act as if we are serious about protecting that which was bequeathed to us by those who handed down this bequeathal to that generation, and every generation is supposed to tumble it down to the next generation so that it's kept in place in perpetuity. They ratify the document to themselves and their posterity, and that's what each generation has to do to maintain that posterity, which is passed down as a bequeath to that generation, and you maintain it to bequeath it to the next generation that comes after you. We can't be going around the world and claiming we're going to give this to someone else and we're going to stand there and be a guide to something that we are in fact we're sending in our own backyard. We can't be doing that, and we are not aware that that's what we're doing. We got to maintain the integrity of our strictures. What did they put in place in Philadelphia? And are we going to rescind that because we got these other things that are happening right now where they may not be apropos anymore because that's outdated now? We can have states that dictate to the federal government. Single states can do that. And I want to ask you a question here. Why do you think that Jacob Frey and Tim Walz are so much on getting ICE, the immigration, ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is what the federal government, only the federal government can do that job. They were telling these Johnny come lateless. This one guy was saying to them that this is a federal. You're in federal territory. This guy's telling him, well, you're inside of the city, and blah blah. You have to be inside of a city, yes, but the federal government doesn't rescind itself because it's inside of the states. You're talking about the federal government has to subordinate itself to the states because it's inside of the states. How can you operate a federal government that's under Article 6 if it has to subordinate itself once it gets inside of the states? It goes in the states in order to assert its authority in those states, as it's doing right now in Minnesota. It has a right to be there. And this idea that they want them out of there, why do you think they're doing that? I'm asking that question. Why do you think that Jacob Frey, who is the mayor of the largest city in Minnesota, and this guy that they actually placed on Kamala Harris's ticket in 2024, he was placed on that ticket. She didn't choose this man. This man was chosen. And it made no sense to actually choose him based upon if you're talking about between Shapiro and who is the governor of Pennsylvania, because that's the toss between them. If you're talking about it's a toss up between Shapiro and Tim Walz. Tim Walz, there are 10 electoral votes, and in Pennsylvania there are 19. And electoral votes is how you get elected in the United States, and they are the decision makers. Overlook that because and here's the because part. They were assured of doing in 2024 what they had done in 2020. That's why they would do that. You would not do that under any other circumstances. I dare anybody to tell me how you make that choice, given the dynamics that you're foregoing 19 electoral votes that are not of a surety for 10 votes that were assured, because Minnesota had already been out there and showed what it's going to do. It showed what it did with this mockery of our justice system with George Floyd. You're gonna put some wings on this guy. This guy's a thug, and they're gonna talk about this guy as if he's going to heaven somewhere. And they had burned down. They had burned down the police precinct in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. They burned the police precinct down. And so the point I'm making here is why would they respond the way they responded and do what they did unless they were of certainty they were going to be able to duplicate what they did in 2020 when they were able to rescind the verdict of the voters, which is what they did. We moved from Davos, Switzerland, to Minnesota, and we've got to understand where we are in both places, both in Switzerland, where that meeting was held, and what our stand is there, and what our place is there, and what our place should be right now in our own country, because our country is demanding that we stand upon the legally put in place by the framers of this country that put in place here a hierarchy of control when things like this happens, like it's what's happening in Minnesota right now. If that prevails, I'm gonna tell you right now, if that prevails, if this prevails, if they can order them to, it's not going to happen, by the way, but if they could order them out of the state because they don't want them there, they're saying we don't want you here, and because you don't want them there, they leave. They're not going anywhere. And Walsh and Jacob Frey know they're not going to leave. So why are they doing that? Why are they doing that grandstanding? Because they don't want because they don't want this investigation coming. Because this investigation is going to show that there's collusion in terms of what happened with all that money being siphoned off in by the Somalians in Minnesota, and the politicians got their fingers in that pie. That could not have gone on for as long a time as it went on. That could not have gone on for that period of time to the extent and magnitude that it went on, and then they're not getting a cut of that themselves, and they don't want that investigation go forward, and that's why they're out there keeping this mess going, because they do not want to have that question called. And if Trump is true to his word, and we're going to see if he is true to his word, because there's some hard decisions got to be made here, and we've got to, in fact, stand up upon the sixth article of the Constitution of the United States, the Supremacy Clause of the United States, and make sure that what prevails in this conflict that we have in Minnesota, that does not, in fact, get rescinded, not through the amendment process, by them just not following it anymore. We can't have that either. And so we are going to be watching very carefully what's happening right now, looking at the mote in our own eye, and then we can begin to talk about the speck elsewhere. But we got some problems here at home right now that got to be dealt with, and let's move from focusing on what happened over there in Europe, not to overlook it and not be aware of it, and all of that, be aware of it and understand it, but understand that our first prerequisite for anything that happens is right here at home. Okay, Mr. Trump, President Trump, we're watching everything that's going on, and we hope you are up to the task, because you're called to do something here and to hold some people to account. And that's what's got to happen before if this problem is going to be resolved in the name of the framers, in the behalf of the United States of America. Okay, we are out of here again. This time we'll be seeing you next week, as always, and we hope to pick up from this point and go forward with another conversation about our country as it relates to where we are here and where we fit into the world scheme of things as well. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.